The last morning I drove to work, I sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes with the engine running. I had made that same drive for 27 years. Same two-lane highway, same grain silos, same gas station where half the county stopped for coffee before sunrise. I was 55 years old, earning more than I ever had, and 5 years away from the pension date everyone expected me to reach. Instead, I walked inside and resigned. 3 months later, I was living in the countryside of the Philippines, about 30 minutes from the nearest large town. The house I had paid to build was not ready. I was sleeping on a mattress in my girlfriend's family room, taking cold bucket baths, and watching my retirement savings fall faster than my spreadsheet said they should. My family thought I had lost my mind. Before the house was finally livable, I would start wondering whether they were right. My sister said I was throwing away the safest years of my career. My brother said I was confusing a vacation with real life. A former coworker asked what I would do when the money ran out. I gave everyone the same answer. I've done the math. And I had. I had budgets for housing, food, health coverage, visa extensions, emergency flights, and the small home I planned to build on land that was not mine. On paper, it worked. What I had not calculated was how quickly a delayed house, a bad contractor, and a life I did not fully understand could change everything. I grew up outside a small farming town in the Midwest. My father repaired tractors and heavy equipment. My mother worked at the county courthouse. Nobody in my family traveled much. Leaving the country was something other people did. I followed the path I understood. I finished school, took a job at a manufacturing plant, bought a modest house, and eventually moved from the production floor into maintenance supervision. The work was not glamorous, but it was dependable. I had never married and had no children. I came close once in my 30s, but that relationship ended, and the years moved faster after that. Most people assumed I was comfortable alone. For a long time, I believed it too. By 53, my evenings had become almost identical. I came home, heated something from the freezer, watched television, and went to bed early enough to repeat it the next day. I was not miserable. That was part of the problem. There was no terrible boss or sudden crisis pushing me out. My life simply felt finished before I was ready for it to be. Around that time, I met a woman from the Philippines online. I know how that sounds. My family knew too. I was average-looking, a little overweight, and losing more hair than I like to admit. I drove an older pickup, bought clothes from the same stores, and had no impressive photographs or exciting stories. She never acted as though I needed to be someone else. She was in her mid-40s and raising a school-age daughter. We talked about ordinary things: work, food, bills, school, and family. She did not ask me to rescue her, and she never treated me like a wealthy American arriving to fix her life. We talked for more than a year before I visited. I sent no large payments, made no promises, and arrived with a round-trip ticket instead of an engagement ring. The first trip lasted just over 2 weeks. The second lasted nearly a month. Both times, I stayed mostly outside the crowded parts of the city. She and her daughter lived in a quieter area where roads narrowed, houses spread apart, and mornings began with roosters instead of traffic. The nearest large town was about 30 minutes away. That suited me. I had no desire to cross an ocean only to live in another crowded city. During my second visit, she showed me an open section of her property where an old wooden structure had once stood. The land was hers. I understood what that meant. As a foreigner, I could not simply put the property in my own name, and building there would leave me exposed if the relationship failed. She never pushed me. In fact, she suggested renting nearby might be safer. But I stood there imagining a small concrete house, a covered porch, a backup water tank, and a vegetable garden. I pictured her daughter doing homework at the kitchen table. For the first time in years, I could see a future that looked different from my present. When I returned to America, I lasted 9 months. Then I left my job, sold my house, and began taking apart the life I had spent nearly 3 decades building. The money looked substantial. The number of years it needed to last made it feel much smaller. After the mortgage, a small car loan, taxes, and moving costs, I had just under $230,000 available. That was everything. My pension could begin at 60, although leaving early reduced the monthly amount. Social Security was farther away, and I did not want to claim it as soon as I became eligible unless I had no other choice. The savings had to carry me across the gap. I estimated that we could live comfortably for around $1,800 a month once the house was complete. I kept more than a year of living expenses separate, reserved money for health care and emergency travel, and created a return fund I promised not to touch unless I had to move back to America. I was not walking into this blind. I had visited twice, knew the area, and trusted the woman I was moving for. What I did not understand was how little control either of us had over the house being built. The house was supposed to be simple: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a combined kitchen and living area, and a covered space outside. Her daughter would have her own room. The first estimate was $42,000. Even after furniture, appliances, screens, and a water tank, it fit within the limit I had set. I paid in stages and received photographs and short videos every few days. I watched concrete blocks become rooms and steel framing rise above the walls. Nothing looked fake. There were delays, but each came with a reasonable explanation: rain, late deliveries, or a worker dealing with a family emergency. A month before my flight, the builder said the house would be livable when I arrived. Painting and cabinets might continue, but the bathroom, electricity, doors, and windows would be ready. I pictured setting down my suitcase in our bedroom and eating breakfast with her daughter before school. The week before I left, I sold my pickup. My sister drove me to the airport. At a gas station, she asked one final time whether I was certain. "You can still change your mind," she said. For nearly 30 years, I had treated changing my mind as weakness. Once I committed, I finished. I told her I was not turning around. When I landed in the Philippines, my girlfriend and her daughter were waiting. Her daughter held a handmade sign with my name and 2 small flags drawn underneath. For the first few hours, every doubt disappeared. We ate near the airport, then started the drive home. As the crowded roads gave way to fields, small stores, and clusters of houses, I felt myself relax. This was the life I had imagined. About 20 minutes from the property, my girlfriend rested her hand on mine. "There is something I need to explain," she said. The builder had fallen behind. He kept promising a last-minute push, and she had hoped the house would become livable before I saw it. By the time she knew it would not, she was embarrassed and afraid I would think she had misled me. I asked what was unfinished. She looked toward the road. "Many things." We stopped at the property before going to her family's home. From a distance, the house almost looked complete. Up close, there were open spaces where windows belonged, loose wires hanging from electrical boxes, and a bathroom with tile on one wall but no working toilet. There was no running water, no electricity, nowhere to sleep. The builder walked through the rooms, pointing at unfinished sections as though he were showing me progress. Then he smiled. 2 more weeks. I wanted to argue, but I stood there surrounded by dust and tried not to embarrass my girlfriend in front of everyone. She was upset too. That mattered. She had trusted the same promises I had, although I was still hurt that she waited until the drive home to tell me how bad it was. Her family had prepared a place for me in their small house. 2 bedrooms were already shared by several people, so a mattress waited in the main living area with fresh sheets and a fan. Her mother had cooked enough food for a celebration. They were doing everything they could. That made it harder to admit how uncomfortable I was. The first night, motorcycles passed outside, dogs barked, and several roosters began before sunrise. At 5 in the morning, someone stepped around my mattress to prepare breakfast. I had lived alone for years. Now there was no door I could close and nowhere to unpack. My suitcase, shoes, documents, medication, and chargers occupied the small space they had cleared beside the wall. The bathroom had no hot water. I bathed with a plastic scoop and a bucket, lifting the door slightly each time I closed it. I had done that during my visits, but then it felt temporary. By the fourth morning, it no longer felt charming. There were ants around food, mosquitoes in the evening, and the occasional large cockroach. The first one ran behind my suitcase as I was getting ready for bed. I pulled everything away from the wall while the family tried not to laugh. Her daughter asked, "Are there no cockroaches in America?" I said there were. "Then why are you scared?" I had crossed an ocean and risked my future, but there I was losing a fight with a cockroach. Her daughter had a point. The next morning, the builder asked for another payment for windows, plumbing, and labor. According to my records, some of that work was already included. He blamed higher material prices, transportation costs, and changes I had requested. Some of it was fair. I had added screens, upgraded the water tank, and requested more outlets. But the new amount was not small, and the house still had no working bathroom. I told him I would pay for the windows after they arrived. He wanted half in advance. We settled on less. Then the workers disappeared. For several days, I walked to the site and found the same cement bags, loose wires, and open windows. The builder eventually said his crew was finishing another job. That was when 2 more weeks stopped sounding like an estimate. My girlfriend told me builders sometimes moved between jobs depending on weather, materials, and who had money available. She still believed it would be finished. I asked when. She could not answer. That evening, I suggested renting a small place until construction ended. She became quiet. At first, I thought she was worried about money. Then she asked whether I was ashamed to stay with her family. I tried to explain that I needed sleep, privacy, hot water, and somewhere to unpack. She heard a list of everything her family did not have. "We prepared this place for you," she said. "Everyone is trying." She was right. I was grateful, but I also knew I could not sleep in the middle of the living room for months. We had spent more than a year discussing the life we wanted. We had never discussed what would happen if that life did not begin on schedule. The next day, we walked to the empty construction site. She told me she understood why I wanted to rent. Her family had moved furniture and changed routines to make space for me, so my suggestion had sounded like rejection. I told her, "I can be grateful and still be uncomfortable." We agreed to stay 2 more weeks. If the house was not livable, we would rent temporarily. I also changed how I handled the builder. No more payments based on promises. Materials had to arrive before I paid for them, and work had to be completed before money was released for the next stage. He objected. He needed cash for labor and supplies. I reminded him that I had already paid for things I could not see. He told me to trust him. I said trust was why I was sleeping on a mattress in someone else's living room. A few workers returned. Window frames went in. Pipes appeared in the bathroom, and an electrician began running wire. Then the electrician vanished. The builder said he was sick. A worker said he had taken another job. Nobody seemed to know the truth. Meanwhile, I adapted. I bought sealed containers for food and an electric kettle so I could mix warm water into the bathing bucket. Her daughter began asking whether it was American temperature. She asked questions about everything: why I ate bread instead of rice, why I checked my shoes, and why I said I was full before eating again an hour later. I was not trying to replace her father. Any place I earned in her life would take time, but I began looking forward to those conversations. The financial side was getting harder to ignore. My $1,800 budget assumed the finished house would have no rent. Instead, I was contributing to the family household, paying for transportation, construction changes, internet, a small refrigerator, and a failed water pump. My first month cost more than $2,500. The second was worse. The builder claimed the estimate included the septic tank, but not all the digging, pipe, and concrete needed to install it. I could have stopped construction and rented a completed house, but walking away meant abandoning the largest part of my plan before I had lived in it. I approved the additional cost. When I updated my spreadsheet, the bridge between 55 and 60 became noticeably shorter. 2 more weeks passed, and the house still was not livable. We found a furnished apartment closer to town, but what looked like privacy to me looked like separation from her daughter's school and her mother. We passed on it. A week later, we found an older 2-bedroom rental between the property and town. It had no air conditioning or hot water, but it had running water and doors that closed. We took it month to month. The first night, I slept behind a closed door for the first time since arriving. For a few days, I felt normal. Then the heavy rain came. Water entered the unfinished house through a window opening and ran down an interior wall where the roof edge had not been sealed. Cement bags were soaked, and plywood had begun to swell. The builder arrived, looked at the damage, and asked for another advance to replace the materials. I asked why I should pay. He said the crew had expected to use them sooner. He blamed the unfinished roof edge on another delayed payment. I reminded him that I had already paid for the roof. His voice rose. Mine did too. I told him I would not release another dollar until someone independent inspected the house. He said I was making the project impossible, and left. That night, I sat at the rental table with my bank account and construction expenses open on the laptop. For the first time, the numbers showed what I had refused to consider. At that pace, I would reach 60 with far less than planned. I might have to claim Social Security early, or return to America and look for work after abandoning a good job. My girlfriend asked what was wrong. I left everything because I thought we had a plan, I said. Every day I'm here, the plan changes. The words were unfair. She had not damaged the materials or made the builder disappear. She had changed her daughter's routine and moved into a rental she did not want because I needed more space. She did not argue. I thought you came here to be with us, she said. Not only for the house. Then she closed the bedroom door. I stayed at the table staring at the screen. For months, I had treated the house as proof that my decision was reasonable. If it was finished and the budget worked, my family was wrong. Now the house was creating the doubt it was supposed to remove. The next morning, I apologized. Not for worrying about the money. That problem was real. I apologized for speaking as though she and her daughter were part of it. She told me she was afraid too. The land was hers, but the money was mine. She knew my family questioned her intentions, and every delay made her fear I would eventually believe the worst things they had said. That conversation changed the project. A local engineer inspected the house. The foundation was sound, and the roof framing could be corrected, but the remaining work would cost more than I wanted. He had also heard similar complaints from other clients. The builder had taken on more jobs than he could finish and appeared to be using new payments to keep older projects moving. We met with the builder one last time. I told him I would pay only for completed work and materials already delivered. He said I was breaking our agreement. I reminded him that the agreement included a finished house. He left the project 2 days later. Finding another crew took time. Some workers did not want responsibility for someone else's mistakes. Others gave estimates even higher than the amount I had rejected. Eventually, the engineer introduced us to a smaller team willing to finish only what was essential. We replaced the planned cabinets with open shelves, postponed part of the porch, and removed the decorative ceiling. I set a final spending limit. No borrowing. No touching the emergency return fund. No convincing myself that one more payment would solve everything. The new crew arrived early, told us when supplies were missing, and finished one section before opening another. Progress was slower than I wanted, but it was real. 3 months after I landed, the electricity was connected. A week later, water reached the bathroom. The electric shower heater followed. Her daughter stood in the doorway while I tested it. "American temperature?" she asked. Close enough. We moved in before everything was finished. One wall still needed paint, the kitchen had no lower cabinets, and the yard turned muddy in heavy rain. but the doors locked. The windows had screens. Her daughter had a room where her school books could stay on the desk, and for the first time, the three of us ate breakfast together in a home that felt like ours. By the time I included temporary rent, damaged materials, and work that had to be corrected, the project had cost a little over $61,000, nearly $20,000 above the original estimate. 5 months after leaving America, I had about $158,000 remaining. That was still a great deal of money. It was also much less than I expected to have. The plan had survived. Its margin for error had not. I lowered our monthly spending. We made fewer unnecessary trips into town, stopped buying imported foods that were not worth the price, and planted vegetables beside the house, although her mother did most of that work. I kept the return fund untouched. It was not a sign that I expected the relationship to fail. It was proof that loving someone did not excuse me from being responsible. A few weeks after we moved in, my sister called. "Do you regret leaving?" she asked. I looked through the screened window. My girlfriend was hanging laundry outside. Her daughter sat at the table complaining about homework. The house was smaller than the one I had sold. My retirement account was smaller too. "Some days I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life," I told her. And now? I could have said everything worked out. That would have been easier. It would not have been true. I still worried about health care, exchange rates, repairs, and expenses no spreadsheet could predict. Moving to the Philippines had not removed uncertainty from my life. It had brought uncertainty closer. But it had also given me something I had stopped believing I would find. A woman who loved me when I was not young, wealthy, or impressive. A child who no longer treated me like a visitor. A home that cost more than it should have, but finally held the three of us together. "Ask me again when I'm 60, I told my sister. She laughed. I did too. I do not know whether leaving my career at 55 was financially wise. A careful advisor probably would have told me to work another 5 years. My family was right about many of the risks. The house was not ready. The budget was wrong. I underestimated how difficult it would be to live without the habits and comforts I had built over decades. But they were wrong about one thing. I did not leave because I believed nothing would go wrong. I left because I finally understood that waiting did not guarantee anything either. The house was eventually finished, and life slowly became ordinary. By then, I had learned what my spreadsheets could not show me. Moving to the Philippines was not the biggest gamble. Believing I could control exactly how it happened was.